All right, everyone. So today what I wanted to do is talk about gold because something that I noticed in the early game is you don't really accumulate gold that quickly just naturally through the game, as in like killing monsters and running over those piles of gold. It seems to build up pretty slowly. And so you might be wondering, what's the best way to end up making gold and how do you get a whole bunch of gold in Diablo 4? And today I wanted to go over that, but also kind of bring some caution as to why gold is not actually going to really be the resource that you are going to want to be too concerned about. Don't get me wrong, it is important and you're going to need a decent amount of gold, but especially in the later game, you're going to see that it's really more of a focus about the actual materials that you need in order to upgrade and reroll stuff rather than the actual cost of gold. And going about getting the materials is going to be much bigger of a grind than the gold itself. But if you're still wondering, how do you end up getting lots of gold in Diablo 4? Let me go ahead and break it down. So you might notice again in the early game, you don't really accumulate a bunch of gold naturally. And that is because the main way that you actually end up getting gold in Diablo 4 is through a decision that you have to end up making. And this is the decision when you end up getting an inventory full of a bunch of stuff, just like I have right here. I've got a bunch of just random stuff just through playing the game. You got to make the decision of, do I end up salvaging my stuff, or do I end up going and do I end up selling it for gold? And it's really answering that question there and deciding to go with the option of selling it that is going to really stockpile a lot of gold. Now, early on, you're probably going to notice, especially if you hover over a lot of your blue and your yellow items, that they don't actually end up selling for a lot of gold. And I highly recommend, while you're still going through the campaign and leveling up, with these items that don't end up selling for a lot of gold to the vendor, you definitely want to go with the option of salvaging them and really stockpiling up those materials while those items still don't have a very high amount of gold that they end up selling at the vendor for. Now, once you end up getting through the campaign to level 50, once you unlock World Tier 3, you're going to notice that the amount of gold that these items actually end up vendoring for goes up quite a bit. And you can see that basically almost all the items in my inventory have a sell value of around 10,000 gold or more. You know, some of them are, of course, a bit less. Some of them are a bit more. And some of them even go up as, like, you can see this one right here, the staff has a sell value of 20,000. So quite a bit higher than early on. And it's really answering that question of, do I end up selling my stuff to the vendor for gold, or do I end up salvaging it and going with the option to sell it to the vendor that is going to help you stockpile your gold reserves? Because even just a single inventory of stuff, if you decide to go and end up selling it at the vendor, you know, that can easily be, you know, 200, 300, half a million gold or more, depending on how much the items that you have are going to end up selling for. Early on, you're not going to get anywhere close to that much, so I don't recommend it. But later on, if you do end up needing gold, all you have to do is just end up selling your items. Now, something else that if you want to min-max it, something else that you can end up doing is if you actually take a look at the particular amount of gold that items sell for, you can see that there's going to be a pretty big discrepancy, a pretty big range. Like this staff sells for 20,000. It's of course a two-hander, but you can see that some pieces of gear, like these gloves, only sell for 4,000. So if you need gold and you want to min-max it a bit, what you can do is you can end up selling the more expensive items to the actual vendor for gold, and then end up salvaging the items for less. Keep in mind, though, that when you do salvage, different items like armors versus jewelry versus weapons are going to give you different actual salvage materials. So just keep that in mind as you actually end up selling and salvaging your stuff. Now, while I've described how you actually end up getting gold, I want to go back to what I brought up at the earlier point of the video, which is the priority of, while it's nice to know how you can actually end up getting a decent amount of gold really quickly, it's also important to know that this is very likely not going to end up being your primary focus. Now, there will be times, of course, where you probably do end up needing gold and you're going to have to end up selling some stuff to kind of build up your gold reserves, but especially in the later game, once you end up getting to World Tier 3, once you end up getting, you know, your things like your sacred items, you're going to notice that the actual cost to upgrade these things, like at the blacksmith, for example, in terms of gold is relatively low, but it's actually the material cost that is going to be really high. You can see here that this staff, you know, just getting the 4th upgrade costs 16 veiled crystals, 14 silver ore, 30 of these iron chunks, and 4 of these baleful fragments. Like, these things are going to be a lot more difficult to stockpile than the actual amount of cost of gold to upgrade it as well. And keep in mind that even when you're not in World Tier 3 and even without sacred items, if you're talking about other stuff and upgrading it, while the actual gold cost is low, keep in mind the material cost to actually upgrade stuff. There's an opportunity cost with that involved. Like say these veiled crystals or these silver ores or iron chunks, even though those aren't actually gold themselves, in order, when you're using those materials, you have to keep in mind that you're basically, to use those materials, you've given up the opportunity to end up selling the stuff that gave you those materials for gold. So it's actually, you know, if you think of it that way, you know, your upgrades are actually going to be more expensive than you think. And that's another reason why I mentioned it in the other video. Well, before you get to World Tier 3 and before you end up getting Sacred Gear, I really would highly discourage you to really do too much of this upgrading, is because the gold cost is low, but you're going to be eating through a lot of those materials that you worked so hard to build up a nice reserve from those early rares that they don't end up vendoring for a lot, but they're really nice to help you build up your stockpile of materials so that when you do end up getting items that are worth upgrading, you have a nice stockpile of materials to do so. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is the Occultist as well, because this is actually going to probably be one of the biggest ways that you end up using gold. But once again, the actual material cost is going to be probably something that you're going to be considering more so than the gold when you end up getting to the end game. But this could be very deceptive, because at the Occultist, when you end up going to re-roll something, when you go to the enchant item and you end up re-rolling something, you're going to have the material cost here as well. But also, when you do end up re-rolling, like I've re-rolled this item once, and it was something like 100,000 or 150,000 gold for the first re-roll. But notice now that the re-roll cost is over 1 million. And so if you do end up getting a piece of gear that you really like that has one roll on it that you really don't like, and you don't get a good roll right away, this is where it's going to really start to eat up your gold quite a bit, because the amount of gold just keeps increasing and increasing until you stop re-rolling it. So be very mindful of this, and also keep in mind that in a sense, an item's value almost decreases as you keep re-rolling it and you don't get what you want, because in order to continue re-rolling it, you're going to have to end up eating through more gold. But still, even with the gold cost here, notice how you're still going to need these rare materials, and it's very likely, unless you do a ton of re-rolling or you really don't end up getting the stat that you're looking for, you're going to need to be more mindful of the actual materials than the amount of gold that you have, and it's very unlikely that the gold is going to be too big of an issue. Of course, unless you have a bit of a gambling problem or a bit of a re-rolling problem, which is a whole different topic on its own. But anyway, I just wanted to go over this in a little bit of detail just so you guys have a little bit more of an informed view. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully it helped out. And if you did and you did enjoy, consider leaving a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and keep an eye out for more Diablo 4 videos. Hopefully your gold acquiring and gear building adventures go well. Hopefully you don't go through too many rules, and enjoy the game, as the official release is coming out very soon. So just a couple days left in the pre-release. Have a good one, everyone. Take care, and until next time.